I'm not going to touch the microphone. Minister Borge Brende, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. It's an incredible pleasure to have him here as the Minister in Norway. He's a huge asset, and we're really happy to have you on board for Post-2015. It doesn't just bring the arsenal of environment, but also the business community. And for Post-2015, those are the biggest challenges that we have in trying to make Post-2015 a reality. So thank you. Director General Khalid. Our birthday boy, Anthony. But I have to say that he's a real inspiration because he leads an agency that puts the can-do behind every challenge that we have and really floats above all the cynicism. It's huge to face the challenges that we do. And as we hear what NORAD has done just in contributing to the 8 million lives and the 5 million, many of those millions in my country, my continent, we have to say that this is what we need much more of. So if we could clone you with the birthday, that would be really great. Hard act to follow. I saw Amina, I don't know where she is, but goodness me, how do I follow that, my namesake? I'm not going to sing because that's no thing, but she did show us really beauty from the inside out. The lyrics that she sang to, and a beautiful young person, which I think reminds us today that that's what it's about. It's about our young people. It's about transitioning to a brave new world with many, many challenges and complexities that we have to hope to chart a way forward. I know our good friend Tora Godal is in the audience, and thank you very much because without mentioning another asset to Norway, a huge impact in the health outcomes that have been positive for my country, Nigeria, in the work that you've done on making sure that we do put life-saving drugs and those sorts of inputs into our budget and make it real for millions of lives. Thank you. It's really a great honor to have worked with you. So thank you to NORAD, because I just think that this is an incredible opportunity to speak to your successes, but also, like Oliver Twist and perhaps Olivia Twist, ask for more, because the challenges are so much more complex as we go forward, and we really do need to step up to a plate that is very much fuller as we go from a poverty agenda to a sustainable development one. Speaking to education, I left the private sector in 1999 when I saw that as a consultant, we designed and we built schools and we built hospitals, and they did not deliver to the people. And the one thing that I thought would change that is in my country if we put more effort into education and to try to make a difference. And we have tried, but we failed. We failed on a number of levels, and I think we've heard some of them today as they've been spoken to by both the Minister and Tony in terms of the quality and the learning outcomes. And it's not necessarily about the right education. It's about the education that is responsive to the needs of the people to join the global village, to make a difference in their lives and to have one of dignity. And so it's incredibly important. And one of the things I've learned over the few years and continue to is that while we talk about the value chain of the agricultural sector and we look to poverty and food and nutrition, I think we have to remember that value chain of both education and health, because there are so many parts to it, and I think for a long time we've concentrated on bits of it because the money has never always been there, and I hope that this is something that as I go through what I speak about today, we will take a different look to. It's difficult in the last couple of days to really lift one's spirits and talk positively and with lots of impetus on the can-do when we have lost such a great icon and a human spirit as Madiba Nelson Mandela. But all I can think about right now is how do I put those efforts into living the courage of conviction, my convictions. But it's a time of deep reflection, because I do think that we cannot take for granted people's convictions, and perhaps that's what we need to restate. What really are our convictions? Let's not just speak to his, but what are ours? Reflect on those and gear up to put those in front, speaking much truth to power. Today we're embarking on a truly transformative journey. We speak about what we've done in the past, and I like the Churchill quote, it is truly a transformative agenda. There is no way things are going to be different after post-2015 when we move from a poverty lens based mostly on ODA with the competing domestic resources we have to one that we talk about sustainable development, really driving scale so that the 8 million becomes 80 million, becomes 800 million. This is huge, and what we have to do to face that will be really look at the implications for the partnership, and it is going to have to be a partnership. There's no amount of writing a framework or a policy or a law that is going to make this work unless we, as a global community, as a human family, really believe in the next development framework and that we see ourselves in it, our successes in it, and our life of dignity in it, and our humanity in it. We have a good starting point from the MDGs, and they weren't the best. Often people talk about what was not in the MDGs. I don't think that's hindsight, 2020 vision. I don't think the time that they were prescribed, we really thought about what they would be doing in 15 years' time. I think at that time we were desperate, as various international goaling frameworks had failed by Jomtien in 2000. And what we tried to do was to take the very basic minimum and cobble them together to see if we could actually make any difference on the basic foundations of which we should have. It certainly wasn't something that I embraced. When I saw the MDGs, I was pretty miserable because I was education for all. And Education for All had 6 goals, which I know today, if we had better thought about how to have included them in the MDGs, we wouldn't be speaking about quality, we would not be speaking about preschool, we would certainly not be speaking about the learning outcomes and the skill sets that we need in education. But we didn't, and that's hindsight, and we should take the lessons from that. But they did do one thing, and I can speak about that from my experience. Having said I didn't like them very much, 3 presidents asked me to spend $1 billion a year on trying to make them happen, so I had to like them a little bit. I use them to leverage much more than just the foundation. Partnerships, additional money, learn lessons, try to build systems. And so when we see a goal that says reducing maternal mortality, eventually we did begin to look at primary health care in a holistic way, beyond just building a theatre for emergency obstetric care. We started to look at, right at the very beginning, giving mothers care from the onset. But we also looked at education from a holistic point of view. It wasn't about getting children into school in the end of the day because, as the Minister had said, there could be 100 children in a class. In fact, one governor said to me, if your problem is 120 children in a class, let me show you another classroom. And he took me to a classroom in the middle of the village, actually not in the village, in the town. There were 3,000 children. And they were Islamic education. They were all boys. They had one teacher, and they had older boys who tried to manage 3,000. He said, this is the classroom that I worry about. So he was just faced with challenges all over, and it was for us to try to say, how do we make this work? Realizing that the whole system itself had collapsed, and we needed to really look at the baseline and try to map investments into a whole rather than just pieces of it. Primary education and putting children through a classroom. We experienced years of investing in education where children went through education and out the other end came children without education. And that is something that we have to remedy, and I'm not sure we know the implications of that yet. We see many conflicts around the world and youth involved in that. Even if we wanted to put them back in a job, we have to retool them. We have to give them a new set of skills because they don't have any. We put them through a system that cannot respond to the marketplace. So we have a cohort of youth that we have to attend to. It's not just about getting education right and responsive, but it is about dealing with all those that we failed in the education system that are now a generation that I hope we will not continue to say is lost, that we can do something about it. So it is going to be important that we take the lessons of the MDGs, that we use that as a starting block, because there are many gaps. I hope that we don't wait till 2015 to address some of those gaps, that we are actually working on many of those issues to try to remedy them before 2015. And I'll say very quickly, baseline data is one of them. There is no way that a post-2015 development agenda is going to include new partners like business, and we don't know where we're coming from, so how would we know where we're going to? How do we make smart investments if we really don't have a picture of where all those issues are? How do we keep true to leaving no one behind when we don't even know where they are? And I think this is an extremely important part of what we can do before we embark upon post-2015. We certainly know that the achievements in education have been undermined by growing gaps in the quality and the learning outcomes. And as I've spoken to, the alarming number that don't have access to pre-education that gives them that good sound footing as they step into the education cycle. And that we also talk about the number of those that drop out. How many are actually going into secondary school or encouraged to go in? I was recently in Nauru It's a small island, 10,000 people in the back and behind of nowhere. It takes 4 hours by air to go from Australia. Every time we look at the map, we still look for it. And I was to spend 3 days there. And I thought, as I landed in Nauru, my goodness, 3 days is a long time. But it was important, because the Secretary General says, leave no one behind. This is the smallest member of our family in the UN. And really what we say and do for that family is going to be an indication of what we intend to do for the rest of the world, for the vulnerable, for the voiceless. And they had a great education system, because Australia put quite a lot of funding in to make sure they had good classrooms, great teachers, nice curriculums, and they had 100% enrollment. Sadly, only 31% stayed in school. And that was because there was no connection to a job, to a livelihood, to an economy, to a life after school. So there was no point going to school. Education did not have a value in that society, because the other pieces of the puzzle didn't come together. And this is where sustainable development really matters. That when we say sustainable development, we talk about using it as a vehicle to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. And that we see inclusion in the economy, that societies are inclusive, and that the environment matters on an island like Nauru that's losing its livelihood. It's not so much as whether it has disaster risk reduction and investments in the infrastructure, but actually their livelihoods around them are disappearing. There's not much on the land either, because that's been exploited and there's nothing there to grow. So when you look at their health indices, absolutely atrocious. 90% obesity, 98% with diabetes type A. This is incredible. I've never seen so many kidney machines in my life. Is that what we want to see as a picture of what is okay? Because we can't see them. And I think it reminds me so much of the voice now that we have of everyone coming into a universal agenda, those that we haven't seen, those that matter as much as the ones that we have spent our lives trying to address. So we see millions of youth and adults that really are not achieving their productive life, healthy lives, getting decent jobs and livelihoods at threat if we don't look at the investments that we need to have in the most formative years of our education. We know that education systems must expand to access a quality education, but also to look at the other levels. Then again, I would say that as we speak to the governance agenda, it is about the success of really investing in institutions. As much as we had $1 billion a year of debt relief to spend on education, for a year to 2 years, we couldn't spend that money because we didn't have the institutional capacity to plan or to target those investments the way they should have been. And so I think it's important that when we look at the governance agenda, we don't say corruption or how to use things better and more efficiently. We need the people and the institutions and systems that we take for granted in countries like Norway, but which in fact built Norway to where it is today, to have in our countries, in our environments, in many of developing countries. And we have not to take this for granted. It is the least investment that politicians and heads of states will make. The competing demands are enormous. So when you ask to make an investment in something people cannot see, cannot touch or feel in their political life, it won't happen. They'll do it to the classroom because they can touch and feel a classroom. But to do it to a Ministry of Education that needs to see the capacities there that will deliver all the way to the ground, that the $20 you spend up here is not 99 cents when it gets down, but is a full, perhaps 19.5. That's what we need to have, and that's a very difficult sell. And so we need to push on the governance deal to say this is the glue that holds all of this together, that we don't come back in 15 years' time and wonder why we haven't achieved what we see in an education system. But to do also what the MDGs introduced, and I think many forget that they introduced an integrated way of looking at development, which is also difficult to do. For education to speak to health, to speak to agriculture, to speak to water and sanitation. Everyone has got a budget. Nobody wants to let their money out the door. Nobody wants to share. This is a fact when you get to the table. I think those of us that work for women's issues and gender know fully well that that's the most difficult ask to impact on a development agenda. So we need to bring in new partners like parliaments to really see how best an executive arm of government can work with an arm of government that actually determines the investments that we make, and that we find if we spend in education, we impact health. And if we spend in water and sanitation, we also impact agriculture and health and education. How do we do that in a much better way with an integrated agenda for sustainable development? I can't, of course, not finish my remarks without talking about girls' education. And I think we have to stop speaking about girls' education as though this is something that is just a moral imperative. As we've said before, anyone who talks about the human resource that we need, that we have as an asset, and ignores 50% of it is making a big mistake, both morally and business-wise. It is absolutely essential that we see girls' education not just as empowering that 50%, but empowering the whole, and starting right at the very beginning. We've advocated for this. I think there is no right or wrong way. We have lots of examples to show of why this should be. I think the challenge of the post-2015 and the way in which we handle education is how do we take this to scale? And how do we ensure that this is an integral part of what we talk about inclusive economies and inclusive societies? How do we make less laws to do what communities should be responsible for and hold the whole community by empowering women, not just accountable, but those that will be the guardians of those moral values that should inform the representatives that we have in our governments to do what is right. The EFA goals 2 and certainly MDG 2 have been instrumental in trying to look at the gender parity, but as we said, there are many lessons to be learned from that. I think that the initiatives that Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has put in place is a useful bridge to ensuring that what we have within the next generation of goals really does put up the front a responsive education system that looks just not from preschool through primary and secondary, but really gives the skill set that is necessary for a very different environment, for a very different, complex, challenging world that we have. Today we do speak about migration. It has its challenges. Let's see migration not as a security issue, but as a positive one for change, where people come across borders because they have less chances of where they've come from, but actually can add value to those societies that they enter and use skills and skill sets to respond to the markets that we need. Let's look at the areas of conflict that we have. Syria was mentioned today, a middle-income country that will take us more than 30 years to get back where we need, and enough is enough. But how do we deal with the children who are coming across borders? As I started my mandate a year ago, and we talked about citizens, very quickly those in human rights said to me, while you're going through that, could you talk less about citizens and more about people? Because many people who are not citizens have no rights, and that includes the millions that are going across borders. So the complex environment that conflict plays for us, whether they are upcoming, whether they are just festering and the curtains drawn and so we don't see them and we're expecting to find a fire brigade way of attacking them, I think we need to think about that as we respond to the different challenges that we have. The issues of inequalities will always remain on the radar if we don't take them across all the dimensions of sustainable development. And I think the global community here really has to agree in real terms how we use education to push that, and recognizing that our girls and women will be a big part of that. We have seen also that as we go to the African Union position, many positions are being formulated now. What has been interesting to me over the last few weeks is how many of these constituencies are asking for common positions. That's good news. But even within the African Union, I will say to you that the challenges of getting an African Union position were huge. Because where we have the responsibility of developing an agenda is in New York, and it's a bubble. And many of the PRs there come from a foreign affairs background. None of that reflects the needs of the different constituencies in real terms that you carry an agenda out to have implemented at the country level, because they are ministers of health, ministers of agriculture, of education. And I think the one lesson that we do need to learn is that the common positions now need to be about New York, the country level, and those constituencies that represent us in many of the international fora. And so I would congratulate once again, I've seen many, as I say, of these unions coming together, what's the European Union, the African Union, constituencies in Latin America, Southeast Asia, really moving to find a common position. To find that on a global set of goals that has targets that will be specific and responsive to countries is going to be important. But what is going to be even more important is from the experiences that we have for an agenda that is not going to be legally binding, how do we put an accountability mechanism in place, a framework that we respond to? I think half of that answer is ownership of it right from the onset. So in as much as member states made this huge call for an open and transparent process, for which many people find quite frustrating and confusing, it is actually not a bad way to go. It is not a bad way to go if in the end of the day that an agenda that is a normative framework has more traction and does much better than what we did with the MDGs, remembering that the MDGs were our foundation, they were our baseline, they were certainly not the ceiling, and we hope that we will make sustainable development that ceiling. In closing, and I just see it's on 00, we have a 3-year process of developing the post-2015 agenda, and I think that NORAD's contribution to this is going to be incredibly important over the next 9 to 12 months. Member states will take responsibility and ownership of producing a set of sustainable development goals by September 2014. They will also take responsibility for a financing framework by 2014. And these together will make a whole of what we hope can do. But it won't happen without concerted inputs that actually prioritize what we think can happen and move the agenda, move the needle far around in 15 years. Right now we have a huge agenda. It's a big Christmas tree, and I know it's Christmas now, but honestly I hope that by March next year we will not see that Christmas tree. We will see priorities that can continue to drive an agenda that makes a difference to the billions living in poverty, to those that are in conflict, who live every day in fear. I can't even say they wake up to a life of fear, because many of them don't sleep. They live constantly in fear. How do we make an agenda much more robust and doable at that? The financing framework is going to be important. We can get the substance right here, and there are many of you in this room who are experts and who are committed and lived a long life in development and will continue to do so. But really, what really puts this together is the means of implementation. We talked about the constraints on ODA with the minister. It is a wider remit for finance now, and Norway has a big role to play in putting that on the front burner. What sort of resources can we unlock to make this agenda work? It's that commitment for business into environments that are difficult. So how too do we also find the regulatory environments, the instruments, who is going to be responsible and help lead the way in de-risking them? How do we make that partnership really work for a means of implementation? Or we will fall back on a lot of rhetoric and many more best practice and pilot projects. And I believe that we're long past that. What we want to talk about now is scale, is leaving no one behind, ensuring that everyone has that right and lives one of dignity. Thank you.